Prophecy update this hour. It's great to be in the fall, one of my favorite times of the year. As you know, I occasionally play golf. And I work so I can play golf, I guess is the way to do it. And it's just gorgeous yesterday. The courses are nice and dry, and the colors are out. And as long as you stay out of the piles of leaves and where you can't find your ball very easily, it's a lot of fun. And it's great to watch. I've had these conflicts the last 2 weeks because each of the last 2 weeks there's been a big football game, Florida State and Georgia Tech this week, and Michigan and Michigan State last week, where somebody won on the last play of the game. Fumble recovery on a punt last week, and then a return block kick this week. And I love to see exciting plays. It's just that I'm conflicted when I see like Michigan and Michigan State. The problem I have is that somebody from Michigan went away from that game happy, and that's always a little bit difficult to deal with mentally. So, but anyway, that's just the way it is, I guess. Somebody's got to win these things. This week we're going to talk a little bit about false religion. Somebody once suggested that maybe I should practice my presentations a few times before I get up, and I'm like, if I can do that between the time I finish it, walking up here, and getting a drink at the break, I would do that. Somebody also once asked me, they said, well, how do you do 100 slides in 50 minutes? And the answer is simple: skip 20. That's how you do it. Well, we talk each week about the convergence of events and how these things seem to all be drawing us towards an end time. So today we're going to look at some aspects of false religion in the world. And some of that will deal with culture, philosophy, a little bit about politics, things in the church, religion, and then sort of a view of Israel and Middle East. We'll talk about that at the end. The first thing I'm going to do is this. I saw this on Fox News the other night on the Kelly File. It was a debate between somebody from Planned Parenthood or the abortion industry and Lila Rose, talking about a new law in California that requires pregnancy centers to post things about abortion. So I just thought it's very interesting to watch the way they think. And I think what you also need to watch when I play these clips too is how people never answer. I'm an attorney. I take depositions. One thing that drives me crazy is when people will not answer the question that I ask. In fact, if you're ever in a deposition with me and you do that, you're going to be there for a long time. Or we're going to go see the judge and get you to answer, because it's very frustrating. So watch how this lady, I can't remember her name, Megan Kelly will say it at the beginning, how she doesn't answer the specific question that Lila Rose asked.
For more on this, we turn to Elise Hogue, president of Naral, Pro-Choice America, and Lila Rose, the president of Live Action. Thank you both for being here. So Lila, what is your objection to this law?
There's two big objections. First of all, this is a full-on assault against the freedom of speech. Every pro-life pregnancy care counselor offering not-for-profit, free, comprehensive care for women coming in, other options. And secondly, it's forcing them to promote abortion. And secondly, this is an abortion industry dream come true. They're trying to cut out the competitors, take away the other options for women in the state of California, and say that, no, you don't have these other options. You have to be offered abortion. And ultimately, that's $500 to maybe $8,000 for the later term abortions that the abortion industry and the abortion facilities stand to gain every time a woman walks there, because they're being promoted that by the pro-life pregnancy care centers.
Elise, would you be okay, because your group helped co-sponsor this law, would you be okay if the law also required all abortion clinics and Planned Parenthood to have notices saying this is where you can go to help with pregnancy planning, adoption options, and alternatives to abortion?
You know, one of the things that we differ with Lila on about this is that this is not about freedom of speech. The counselors at crisis pregnancy centers don't actually have to change anything that they're saying. all they have to do is post public signage that gives the woman the right to know what her legal options are in the state of California. And we think that right to know, that regardless of how any individual feels about abortion, we can all agree that women do better with access to information.
Okay, but
we
if
think
that's true,
what
so let
leads
me ask you
to-
this, Elise. If that's true, then would you support, a law mandating the posting of information on family planning or where you can go for adoption options in Planned Parenthood and other abortion clinics? And would you be okay if you think more information is better with a mandate that the abortion clinics have to
Megan,
tell the
yeah.
women what their fetus looks like before they abort it and what will happen during the abortion procedure?
Licensed clinics already actually adhere to this law. They provide options about information about options from adoption to prenatal care to legally accessible abortion. That is already happening.
Elise,
it was happening
Lila.
before this
It's
law.
to- it's to- I mean,
Pregnancy
Planned
centers are the
Parenthood and
only
abortion-
ones
Hold on,
that were actually
Lila, and then I'll go
left
back to you,
out.
Elise.
Planned Parenthood and abortion facilities, their focus is abortion. Over 90% of pregnant women walking into a Planned Parenthood are going to end up having an abortion. Their focus is abortion. It is a full-on assault on the freedom of speech, and it's forcing pro-lifers to be posting abortion ads effectively in their facilities. Where is it going to stop? Is California going to force churches or pro-life families or Catholic schools to force to post abortion notices
let her
everywhere?
respond.
This is an
The answer is probably. And it won't stop in California. That nonsense usually starts there, but
extremely sick law.
Go ahead, Elise.
As I said, this is not about freedom of speech. It's not about freedom to worship however anyone chooses to worship. What it is about setting a baseline threshold of what people that are licensed or what licensed health facilities are required to offer to their candidates. And I would ask Lila what she's so frightened of for women to have all the information about all of their options.
Go ahead, Lila.
Because that's what they're getting at all of the other health facilities.
What this is about, Elise, is it's about abortion facilities, the Naral lobby, your lobby, National Federation for Abortion Clinics, NAF, about Planned Parenthood trying to up abortion numbers. At the end of the day, the focus is abortion. That's why Naral,
Why would
your
they want to up
organization,
abortion numbers?
Naral is against every abortion regulation and restriction. Naral is against term limits on abortion, trying to limit the gestation that you can kill the preborn child at. This is the real agenda of the groups that are behind this law. And so it's hurting the freedom of speech and pregnancy care workers. And it's hurting women and children in California.
There is a reason that a supermajority of self-identified Catholics, Republicans, and conservatives support the Reproductive Fact Act. It's because we know that women do better when we have access to all of the information about all of our options. And California should be proud that they're leading the way on this.
All right. Thank you both. We appreciate the respect.
well, she never answers the question. And because the answer is it's intellectually uncomfortable for her. And I want you to note as she's a person of the left, this president of Naral, and we're going to talk a little bit about that because I think this is sort of a growing thing that I'm seeing in the world and culture, and I'll talk about in a moment. This is an interesting thing from a World Economic Report. Came out this week, Regional Economic Outlook for the Middle East and Central Asia, and it said this: the Middle East's biggest economy, Saudi Arabia, could burn through its financial assets within 5 years amid a drop in oil prices, the International Monetary Fund has warned. I mean, people thought, they're going to be able to build stuff like this forever, and now they have a little bit less than $1 trillion, $765 billion in cash on hand in Saudi Arabia, and that could all be gone in 5 years because they spent a tremendous amount on just paying people for not doing much, government payments, that sort of thing, and there's that. The ability to do that is not infinite. There's a real thing called the economy and the way the economy in the real world acts. Here's an example of a country that doesn't understand the way the economy acts. This is Brazil. They're having a major pension crisis. Whatever is going on in Illinois right now, whatever is going to be going on soon in California, is going on in spades down in Brazil. Down in Brazil, you can retire pretty much around 50 years of age with a full pension. Now, what also happens, though, is if you work it right, you can retire in your early to mid 40s with a full pension. What also happens is that if you marry someone who has a pension and then they pass away, you get the pension. So guess what young ladies are doing? Marrying old guys. Old guy leaves, the money keeps flowing in. It is totally unsustainable. But this is happening all over the world because we're having these demographic collapse in the sense that there are fewer young people to pay taxes, to take care of old people, and there are more and more old people. And old people don't spend as much to stimulate the economy, but their health care costs are higher. So it just does not work out in the long term. And so a person, you may support him, a fool like Bernie Sanders who goes around promising trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars to people, the man doesn't understand the way the real world works. But he says what everybody wants to hear. And I think he actually believes what he says. There was, until last week, one country that really you could count on to take a stand for Israel. So they had an election, and this young man, Trudeau, his resume has things such as, I think he was a snowboard instructor, he was a bartender, and some other things, and he's the good-looking son of Pierre and Margaret Trudeau, from back in the 70s, and so he has now become the head of Canada. He's very pro-Islamic. I've seen a number of pictures of him praying in mosques with Muslims. And if you think what's going on in Europe, well, I told a friend from Canada, look, whatever has happened in our country with regard to immigration and the rise of leftism and that type of thing, put it in a car, take it to Canada, and step on the gas, because it's going to happen even more quickly up there. Because we live at that time, we talk a lot about that here, that we live in a time where all these things are accelerating, because I think they are indicative of living in the end times. And so now here we are with the country to our north. And I really think at this point, it's fair to say that in the world geopolitical scene, Israel now stands alone. That's prophesied. So maybe we can start putting the check mark in that box too. You know, I think we live in the days of Lot. I'm checking the box on that one. And Israel standing alone sure looks like it right now. This report came out about persecuted and forgotten. Christianity under global threat due to persecution. And so it looked at the countries of the world where Christians are being persecuted the most. And it's interesting around which they're settled or are centered. Also note that a country where there's moderate persecution is Russia. Now, I've been reading a lot of things about Russia and Putin. And they're saying, look at this. Putin is out there defending Christians. He's doing things that the United States wouldn't do. And on the surface, that may appear to be true. But Putin is a KGB person. They are schooled in the art of deception. And so I don't trust him even a little tiny bit. I don't trust our government now to really do the right thing. I certainly don't trust him. So his playing around in the Middle East is designed to do one thing. But look at what this report says. At a time when numbers of displaced and refugees hit an all-time high, Islamist groups have carried out religiously motivated ethnic cleansing of Christians, notably in parts of Africa and the Middle East. If this continues, the church's survival in these regions is threatened. The fear of genocide, in many cases well-founded, has prompted an exodus of Christians, notably from the Middle East and parts of Africa. As a result of this exodus, Christianity is on course to disappear from Iraq within possibly 5 years, unless emergency help is provided on a massively increased scale at an international level. A massive exodus of Christians in other parts of the Middle East, notably Syria, combined with increasing pressures on the faithful in Saudi Arabia and Iran, mean that the church is being silenced and driven out of its ancient biblical heartland. Now I want to turn to, I could talk a lot about the economy. We don't talk too much about that here, but there's a lot of indicators that there are troubling signs in the economy. Almost every economist of any repute says, yeah, something's going to happen. We don't know what. And we don't know what it looks like on the other side coming out. It's all up for grabs. I'm just saying that this is, I think it is really, in some respects, unprecedented in human history that this is happening on a global scale. And there are people in charge that want to do things, you know, with sustainability and that type of thing. I'm going to lead this in with a passage from 2 Timothy. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine. 2 Timothy chapter 4. They will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lust shall they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears, and they shall turn away their ears from the truth, and shall be turned unto fables. But watch thou in all things, endure afflictions, do the work of an evangelist, make full proof of thy ministry. Last week, ending on Monday, this past Monday, was the 2015 Parliament of the World's Religions in Salt Lake City. You can still go and access the archive of the video live stream that they did. It is, it's stunning to me. I know Jackie Alnor was there, and I think she's posted some stuff on her Facebook page or blog or the radio show she does on Rapture Ready. You might look her up, and I know she's made some comments about it. I know there were other Christians that were there, and this was a false religion palooza, man. I'm telling you, it was people claimed to be evangelicals and pagans and mystics and contemplatives and Hindus, and it was every religion in the world except really good, solid Christianity. For some reason, they weren't invited. I watched a lot of them. It talked about Mother Earth and the goddess and the feminine goddess, and they had little kids running around, and they were singing songs about we are the trees, we are the rivers, we are the rocks, and they are the rocks. Here's Maryanne Williamson. I know she has been quoted favorably by evangelical authors. She is a big New Age proponent. Course in Miracles, I think, is what she did. Big promoted by Oprah. By the way, I don't have anything on Oprah this week. She has a new TV series out that you can get on her network called Belief. And it really should be called Anything Goes. I'm just telling you, she's I consider her sort of the high priestess of New Age mumbo jumbo religion that I think is indicative of the end times. And this, from the little clips that I've seen of her series, is everything that you could imagine that's bad about it is. But she's very, popular, and a lot of people are going to be deceived by this. But here's Maryanne Williamson talking about this. For example, I'm going to play some quotes. That's a picture of her at the conference, the Parliament of World Religions. And she said this: the divine goddess is not just beautiful, she is fierce. Another person talking about psychology said this: Carl Jung was not entirely kidding when he called himself a polytheist. Now, at least they're honest enough to admit this stuff. But the interesting thing is they talk about this and nobody cares. Anything goes. Itching ears. Turn to fables. 2 Timothy chapter 4 said, and remember the context of when Paul wrote 2 Timothy chapter 4. He was in prison. He knew his time was short. And the Holy Spirit led him to write this type of thing about itching ears and turning to fables. And that would be a characteristic of the end times. Here's another one on feminist witchcraft. Our holy book is female flesh and blood, and the rituals we make come out of our embodied experience. Another person got up in front of the crowd and said, let me be the first to welcome the Pope, talking about his encyclical on climate change. Let me be the first to welcome the Pope to the ranks of paganism. Now, I did an interview this week on a radio program called For Love of the Truth with City Heartline, and I talked a little bit about this book. I've mentioned it before. It's a book by Michael Walsh. It's not the easiest read in the world, but I think it's very astute in its analysis of where we are in the culture and the world today. And it's really about what I would call the religion of leftism. And that was what was on display at the Parliament of World Religions last week in Salt Lake City. This leftism, anything goes, there's no standards, we'll deconstruct everything, you'll do what feels good, and that's the way it is. In his intro to his book, Michael Walsh says this, and he talks about the Frankfurt School of Philosophy and how that has entered in. And if any of you have been to college, I went to a Christian college, and then I went to Indiana State to get a master's degree. And one of my professors the first semester made me read a book by a guy named Quinney called Critique of Legal Order. It was leftism, Marxism, totally all the way through. It was bizarre. And I went to the professor, and I told him, he was in the office next door, and he's a young guy, he's only like 27, and so he's only about 4 or 5 years older than I am. And I said, he had a PhD, bright guy, but I said, Bob, I'll give you the answers you want to get my A, but don't make me read garbage like that anymore, okay? Because that's just plain nonsense. And you know it, in your heart you really know it. Well, he never changed, I don't think, but he had a very successful career in the university, much more so than I would at that time. I was thinking about maybe going into teaching, and that probably wouldn't have worked out real well. But in his intro, Michael Walsh says this in The Devil's Pleasure Palace, what the West, and the subtitle of it is The Rise of Critical Theory and the Subversion of the West. And so what's happened is Judeo-Christian values have been completely undermined by this leftism. And it permeates the university, it permeates our educational system, and now, as I look around, even what I would consider to have been fairly conservative, evangelical seminaries, colleges, and whatever, it's permeating those institutions as well. This is, to me, one of the biggest indicators of the end time, because I think it is this part of this world religion of the end times that the Antichrist will use to rise to power. And we see this on display. We have a president who is Exhibit A, and this is the religion of the end times. The Pope would be Exhibit B. He's not even marginally Christian, folks. He uses Christianity as a prop and a facade for his leftist agenda. And the fact that all these leftists at the Parliament of World Religions would sit there and praise the Pope and his encyclical and that type on climate change indicates they know who he is. And I just wonder why people who call themselves evangelicals and Christians can't see it. Why not? We live in the time of what? Great deception. Jesus said, warning, take heed that no man deceive you. That's a warning to the church. And that's going to be characteristic of the end time. So he says this, what the West has experienced since the end of the Second World War has been the erection of a modern devil's pleasure palace, Potemkin village built on promises of social justice and equality for all, on visions of a world at last divorced from toil and sweat. Instead, as empirical evidence proclaims, this world has become hell. The world sought by the critical theory disciples is all an illusion. The corpses of the untold millions who have died in the attempts of the literally unholy left to found the kingdom of heaven here on earth, divorced from God, surely testify. It's a very astute analysis of what we see going on. In fact, in his book, he actually goes back to the start of the problem. The Garden of Eden in Genesis chapter 3, where Eve said, the devil said to Eve, has God said? Eve then said what God had said, and then the devil says, well, did he really mean that? So the devil was the postmodern paradigm. He was deconstructing what God said from the beginning. And now these people are permeating themselves through the church. Here's an example of one. Here is Corinna Gore, Al Gore's daughter, in the plenary session on climate change, introducing a person. And I apologize if the video doesn't quite match up. I had to kind of process it because to get it down to size so I could put it in the presentation. So here she is introducing a leftist, an emergent guru in the so-called, he claims to be an evangelical and a lot of other things. You'll see who she introduces.
Brian McLaren is an author, speaker, activist, and networker among innovative Christian leaders. His books include A New Kind of Christianity, A Generous Orthodoxy, Naked Spirituality, Why Did Jesus, Moses, the Buddha, and Muhammad Cross the Road?
Global warming is a matter of science and economics and politics, but it is a spiritual and moral and religious issue. Amen? Many of the stories that we've been telling ourselves and our children are destructive and harmful and dangerous. Our old stories often said that God gave the earth to humans so they could use it however they wanted for their profit. Those stories said that God would soon destroy the earth, which gave powerful people a license to plunder it as if it were a store going out of business.
You see how he's reinterpreting the scriptures on his leftist religious view?
Our old stories often said that God chose and favored some people to the exclusion and diminishment of others.
You mean like the Jews, Israel? That's exactly what he means.
Men and boys over women and girls, one race or tribe over others, straight over gay, this religion above or over that, the pure and orthodox over the skeptic or different, the rich over the poor. Or maybe our old stories said that everything was a matter of fate, or that the earth was an impermanent distraction from which we can escape on our own private inner enlightenment vacation while the rest of the world goes up in smoke.
So in 2 Timothy chapter 3, by the way, we can check the box on this one too. Knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers walking after their own lusts. You will note where Peter, writing under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, said that this type of thinking comes from, it does not come from a proper knowledge of God or the scripture or the word of God. It comes from the evil lust of a person's flesh. So, Brian McLaren operating in the flesh. Now, he uses a Mac. That's probably the only thing we agree on. And saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. I want you to remember the slam that Brian McLaren, this great, loving, emergent leader, who everybody says, oh, he's so kind, he's so gracious. He slammed every single one of you in here and around the world that believes that Jesus Christ is coming back to take care of the world. It is a slam. And so in a conference where witchcraft, paganism, mysticism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Native American indigenous peopleisms, and every other type of religion on the world was okay, the second coming of Christ is what he slams. That is all you need to know about where this man is. And it boggles my mind. I'm preaching here, ranting maybe. It boggles my mind that evangelical leaders for years have been duped by this guy. They are deceived, and if they're into it and they're going along with it, and you're in a church where this is happening, I can without reservation say, you're in spiritual Babylon and you need to flee. And as my friend Jacob said, and when you go, you take as many people as with you because you are on a rescue operation to protect the souls of those people. But remember, please pray for Jacob. He's up and down, but he's getting better. So here's a little bit more. I want you to listen for a key word of what McLaren says in this part.
A bigger, better, more gracious story. rooted in the diverse riches of our various traditions, spoken in the accents of our different cultures, but leading us to common and joint action. Something is trying to be born among us. Something is trying to take root, take flight, break free.
Actually, I agree with him on this one too. So the Mac and this, except he thinks it's good, I think it's from the pit of hell.
It's a movement, an urgent, multi-faith, spiritual movement that looks like the people gathered here, diverse, mutually appreciative, and deeply dedicated. It has been said that organized religion is dying, and some people applaud that fact because the religious industrial complex is too often stuck and stagnant, organized for the wrong purposes: self-preservation, protection of privilege, an escape into yesterday or tomorrow, rather than an engagement with the fierce urgency of now. The movement we need must transform organized religions into organizing religions. Religions organizing for the common good. Religions equipping and deploying people in a global, passionate, dynamic movement of contemplative activists.
Contemplative activists. You remember Phileena Hurwitz, the mystic, one of the mystic chicks that I call them, running around at Christian colleges talking about her whole thing is contemplative activism. It's based on mysticism. It is not even marginally Christian. And why Biola, why Taylor, why other Christian colleges have had her speak in their chapels to their students, again, is something that is beyond my comprehension. I don't get it. It is paganism. It is leftism. It is not Christianity. Can we get that clear? Here's another one who has spoken at the largest, probably the largest evangelical church here in Columbus. I think you know which church I'm referring to over there on Cooper. And this is what he had to say. You'll know who it is, Jim Wallace.
The powerful thing about an assembly like this is not only to celebrate our diversity, which we should. What if this kind of gathering could get to the heart of the questions that we must address? If you believe that loving our neighbor as ourselves follows directly after loving God in all of our traditions, and no matter your sense or notion of God, if you're from a tradition that says we here are all brothers and sisters tied together, then income inequality is a spiritual issue, a moral issue, and a religious test of our belief. Because we had these Millennium Development Goals, MDGs, to cut poverty in half in 15 years. And now at the UN, just a few weeks ago, we agreed, many nations, on sustainable development goals, now to finish the job and end extreme poverty by 2030. And the people who know say, for the first time in history, that is possible. Francis addressed the Congress, but he also addressed the World Economic Forum a year and a half ago at Davos. First night, a letter was read, and Francis said this. To all the CEOs, he said, wealth should serve humanity and not rule it. You could have heard a pin drop in the room.
I would hope that they could hear a pin drop because they would be stunned at the audacity of someone who sits. And so when he's in his palace in the Vatican, so very clear, somebody misunderstood this last time I said. If Francis is serious about helping the poor, they need to go down in the basement of the Vatican and have a giant garage sale of all the wealth and treasures that are down there. So you could have heard a pin drop if I was there and read it, because I would be thinking, wow, this really is the time of the end. It really is getting close to wrapping up. So that's what happened in Salt Lake City. I'll probably have a few more to play to you in the weeks and months to come. There's a, like I said, it's a false religion Lollapalooza there on that website, and you can, I don't know. It's very troubling. I think they had 14,000 people there. And you know what? Just sidebar commentary. When I went to Jan Markell's conference 3 weeks ago, there were maybe 4,000 people there each night, each day. She didn't charge. They had 14,000 people in Salt Lake City, and they charged $500 a head. You think people are deceived? So anyway, now I'm going to turn to politics for just a moment. I have to make some comments. I just want you to, this is it almost leaves one speechless. Some of you watched the hearings this week. I'll play just a short clip. Understand, though, that polling done since felt that 75% of the people polled after this believe she was treated unfairly. Now remember, she's the one who wants to re-educate every one of you that doesn't support abortion rights and other things. I've played the clip at least twice in here. I engaged in an act of mercy and did not play it today, but here's a little compilation of some clips that happened about some of her emails, about whether she knew about Benghazi being a terrorist attack or a protest against a movie.
Rage and violence directed at American embassies.
Now, this is what she said back in 2012. Remember, this is during the election cycle.
Over an awful internet video.
Approximately 1 hour after you told the American people it was a video, you say to your family, 2 officers were killed today in Benghazi by an Al-Qaeda-like group. You tell the American people one thing, you tell your family an entirely different story. The next day, within 24 hours, you had a conversation with the Egyptian Prime Minister. You told him this: we know the attack in Libya had nothing to do with the film.
Violence directed at American embassies over an awful internet video.
It was a planned attack, not a protest.
Has led to these protests, to these protests, to these protests.
Let me read that one more time. We know, not we think, not it might be, we know the attack in Libya had nothing to do with the film.
It was a planned attack. Now, that was pretty good cross-examination. That was probably one of the most effective parts of the whole hearing. Some of it was not that effective, but really? And she was treated unfairly because they read her emails? It's stunning. So let's move on from that. If you have, well, if you want to pray for America, now would be a good time to do that. So let's just talk a little bit about the Middle East and Israel, and then we'll wrap up a little bit earlier today. Of course, here's Erdogan and Merkel, and you see these alliances coming together. Germany, Turkey. She's from, by the way, she was raised in East Germany under the communist regime at that time. So I don't really, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about where she's coming from or what she thinks is important. Of course, a lot of what's going on now is what's going to happen with Assad in Syria. What's next? This is from the front page of the Arab News out of Saudi Arabia. Of course, this week, Assad, who nobody knows where he ever is, but here he was in the Kremlin meeting with Putin. Here's a picture of Syria is broadening their offensive. Zero Hedge this morning on their blog has a thing about Russia is taking over the Middle East. And what does that do to the petrodollar, which is really the reserve currency of the world? And the article on Zero Hedge, zerohedge.com, the word zero spelled out, zerohedge.com, says this: the Kremlin's alliance with Jordan plays right into that dynamic, as the Moscow-Tehran nexus is literally encircling Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia, Doha and Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, all oil-rich Gulf states. And what's going to happen with the world economy as Russia projects its power there? And because the article concludes, I think correctly, the United States is not going to do anything. It doesn't look like. At least not if we continue to have the current leadership and what's looking more like the one that we may be getting for, well, however long it is till everything wraps up. Maybe 4 years, I don't know. Here's a picture. We talk a little bit about Isaiah 17 a lot here. Not a little bit. We talk a lot about Isaiah 17 here. Here's a picture of taken from a Russian drone flying around Syria, around Damascus. I want you to look at some of these scenes as to some of the suburbs of Damascus and the just massive destruction that's taken place in that city. And it talks about in Isaiah 17 that Damascus will become a ruinous heap. Now, I don't think it's there yet, but it's certainly well on the way, that it wouldn't take much to really finish it off. And I do think that this may be one of the next events on the prophetic timescale, something happening in Damascus. I mean, it's just unbelievable. I mean, look at block after block after block of destroyed buildings. No wonder everybody's left, right? There's no place to live. But people are still living there, by the way. But this is what Damascus, until recently the capital, well, probably, I guess it's still the capital of Syria, or what's left of it. It's amazing that this is happening. Of course, now, a lot of the mythology that's risen up about this is that this massive migration that's coming from the Middle East is the result of the Syrian conflict. And the Syrian conflict is being used as a kind of a ruse, I think, to allow massive Muslim immigration into Europe. Now, I agree, these people need Jesus and people should witness to them too, but governments also have the responsibility of protecting their citizens from people that would oppress them, kill them, that type of thing. And it's something to be concerned about. At the Croatian border right now, they said there's a logjam of migrants and things are getting pretty desperate there. People are sort of stacking up as they're waiting to transverse. Hungary's closed its border, so now they're all going next door to the west to Croatia. And Croatia is straining under the number of refugees that are coming in from, and I know they say Christians are fleeing, but I have a couple things I want to share with you. Here's Sweden. This article was on Bloomberg Business the other day. Sweden almost triples refugee estimate as system buckles. Now, Sweden is not like next door to Croatia or Syria. It's a ways up there. And here's a projection. The blue on the left is what the Swedish government was saying of number of people that were going to come in and what they're now actually projecting in red. And it's about triple what they were projecting. Here's what the Bloomberg article says. Sweden is being overwhelmed in its efforts to absorb a record number of asylum seekers looking for refuge inside its borders. The current refugee situation lacks an equivalent in modern times, said Anders Danielsson, Director General of the agency in Sweden. We see people literally walking through Europe. To get a sense of the scale of Sweden's refugee program, an equivalent inflow to the United States, adjusted for population, would be 6 million people in 1 year. That is the size of what? 4 Columbus, Ohio's in 1 year? So far this year, about 100,000 have arrived in Sweden, including 20,000 unaccompanied children. Authorities are now erecting tents and need as many as 45,000 additional housing spots this year, according to the Migration Agency. In the Gatestone Institute, they have they have some things they wrote about Muslim invasion of Europe. Here's just some of the things they said. Any criticism of Islam in Europe is treated as a form of racism, and Islamophobia is considered a crime, or these are pictures from Australia, or Austria, by the way, is considered a crime or a sign of mental illness. European people still have the right to vote, but are deprived of most of their power. All important political decisions in Europe are made behind closed doors by technocrats, and this is all part of this leftism thing. I'll go read Patrick Wood's blog. You know, he's spoken to us before about the rise of technocracy. These elites that think they can control everything because they know better. Europe has renounced force so to many it appears weak, vulnerable, and easily able to be overpowered. The sudden arrival of hundreds of thousands more Muslims most likely prompts Europeans to think that the nightmare will get worse. They see powerlessly that their leaders speak and act as if they have no awareness of what is happening. Gatestone says this: illegal Muslim migrants will live on social benefits until the bankruptcy of welfare states. In all 28 countries of the European Union, birth rates are low and the population is aging. So for people under 30 in the European Union, the 28 countries there, they account for 16% of the population, or 80 million people. In the 22 Arab countries, plus Turkey and Iran, because we want to get the Muslim population countries, 70% of the population is under the age of 30, or 350 million people. That's a pretty big discrepancy. By the way, what are the ages of people in military service usually? Over or under 30? Under 30. So the Arab countries have a pool to draw from of 350 million people. Europe has 80 million, and that number's only going to get, that gap is only going to get larger. Journalists in Western Europe continue to depict them as refugees fleeing war in Syria. The description is false. According to statistics released by the European Union, only 25% of them come from Syria. The true number is probably lower. The Syrian government sells passports and birth certificates at affordable prices. The vast majority of migrants come from other countries: Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Eritrea, Somalia, and Nigeria. What are the characteristics of that for the most part? All Muslim countries. Many do not seem to have left in a hurry. Many bring new high-end smartphones and large sums of cash, 10 or 20,000 euros, sometimes more. Many have, and these are people, you know, if they're in Syria, it doesn't look like there are a lot of bank branches open in Damascus because they've all been blown up, but they have all this cash. Where are they getting this? I still think this is somebody is funding this. Many have no passports, no ID, and refuse to give fingerprints. Whenever people flee or survive, the men come with whole families: women, children, elders. Here, instead, more than 75% of those who arrive are men under 50, fewer women, children, or elders. As Christians are now the main targets of Islamists, the Jews fled or were forced out decades ago, the people escaping the war in Syria should largely be composed of Christians. But Christians are a small minority among those who arrive, and they often hide that they are Christians. Western European political leaders could tell the truth and act accordingly. They do not. They talk of solidarity. It sounds like the World Parliament of Religions, or Parliament of World Religions. They talk of solidarity, humanitarian duty, compassion. From the beginning, Chancellor Angela Merkel of Germany said that illegal migrants were welcome. She seemed to change her mind for a moment, but quickly slid back. In France, President François Hollande says the same things as Angela Merkel. And also notes this: Jews are fleeing Europe in increasing numbers. Native Europeans are starting to flee as well. Well, let's look at Israel, and then we'll wrap this up. This is, a friend sent this to me. This is a little cafe in Israel that's offering a 50% discount if Jews and Arabs come there and eat together. Hopefully it would be, I would hope that it would be busy, but my understanding is the Jews in Israel are reluctant to even go to Arab merchants. So it's having an effect on the economy. Here are a couple videos. The first one is from a guy at Gaza University. And essentially what he's saying is the Jews in Palestine today, because of the occupation, they shouldn't be. Every single, well, let me back this up. Because of the occupation, not because they are Jews. Every single Jew in Palestine is a combatant, even the children. They train their children to use tanks and various kinds of weapons. They breastfeed them on hatred for the Palestinian people, and for that they deserve what they're getting, the stabbings. The military operations and the bombings should be carried out in the very heart of the enemy, in Haifa, Jaffa, Tel Aviv, because that is what hurts the Jews. Here's an imam, a Palestinian cleric, speaking on Al-Aqsa TV a week ago. Here's what he had to say. Let me say something clearly to the Zionists, something that should reach all those enemies, whether left-wing, right-wing, secular, religious, or extremists. Regardless of their appearance or the color of their skin, they are on the land of Islam and the Muslims, on the land of the Prophet's nocturnal journey. Any of our enemies living on this land must understand that they have no place on this land. I want to swear on the Quran that not a single Jew will remain on this land. Not a single settler will remain on this land. Absolutely not. The sheikhs who preceded me swore on the Quran, and he takes the Quran and puts his hand on it, and he goes through and he repeats that not a single Jew would remain on this land, and you would not win any battle. In the Atlantic, a center-left magazine, they talked about this, the paranoid supremacist roots of the stabbing Intifada. I talked a little bit about this last week. Here's just a couple quotes from that article. In September of 1928, a group of Jewish residents placed a bench in the front of the western wall of the Temple Mount for the comfort of elderly worshipers. They also brought with them a wooden partition to separate the sexes during prayer. Jerusalem's Muslim leaders treated the introduction of furniture into the alleyway. It wasn't this big wide plaza at the time. In front of the walls of provocation, part of the Jewish conspiracy to slowly take over control of the Temple Mount. So they've been at this, fostering these lies for going on 100 years. Many of the leaders of, and by the way, there was no Palestine at that time, many of the leaders of Palestine's Muslims believe or claim to believe that Jews had manufactured a set of historical and theological connections to the Western Wall and to the Mount, the site of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, in order to advance the Zionist project. You remember, I showed you documents that were published by the Mufti of Jerusalem, the Hajj Aman al-Husseini, under his auspices. Talk about him in just a moment. A real Jew hater of the first rank, that said this is the site of Solomon's temple. Now they deny it. Now all their publications say something different. This belief defied Muslim history. The Dome of the Rock was built by Jerusalem's Arab conquerors on the site of the Second Jewish Temple in order to venerate its memory. The violence of the past 2 weeks, encouraged by purveyors of rumors who now have both Israeli and Palestinian blood on their hands, is rooted not in Israeli settlement policy, contrary to what John Kerry says, is rooted not in Israeli settlement policy, but in a worldview that dismisses the national and religious rights of Jews. There will not be peace between Israelis and Palestinians so long as parties on both sides of the conflict continue to deny the national and religious rights of the other. We saw UNESCO, which is handles World Heritage Sites for the United Nations. They have been very critical of the way Israel has handled holy sites. There was a resolution adopted at UNESCO that said that the Western Wall, the Kotel, was actually part of the mosque in Jerusalem and had nothing to do with the Jews. Now, before they sent that up for more approval, they withdrew that part because they knew they probably couldn't even get that through. So they passed a resolution saying that certain sites, Jewish sites within Israel, are Muslim, Islamic. For example, one of them is the Cave of the Patriarchs, the Cave of Machpelah, where Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, I think Sarah, are buried. Pretty good tradition supports that down at Hebron. But they tried to get through that the Wailing Wall was part of the mosque. So, as this person says in the Jewish Chronicles, they've tried to do this, but they failed this time, but they're going to try again and again, and they never stop. They will never stop until this is all wrapped up. Here's John Kerry speaking in Jordan yesterday about his meeting concerning some of the situation in the Middle East.
Now, I am also very pleased to announce today that Prime Minister Netanyahu has agreed to what I think is an excellent suggestion by King Abdullah to provide 24-hour video coverage of all sites on the Temple Mount, Haram al-Sharif. This will provide comprehensive visibility and transparency, and that could really be a game changer in discouraging anybody from disturbing the sanctity of this holy site. So, today I hope we can begin to turn the page on this very difficult period. We have to join together in calling for an immediate end to violence. We must stress the importance of avoiding provocative actions and rhetoric, and we must work cooperatively. It's the only way to go forward, is to work cooperatively to restore calm. And by restoring calm, we can get back to the critical effort of achieving a lasting peace.
Now, at the hearing, this is interesting. I'm not going to play any more, okay? No need to grab your head or anything. But this was on CNN during the hearing, and I want you to see how the media reports these things that are going on in Israel. You see the little trailer down here at the bottom? Palestinians shot boarding kids' bus. They were terrorists. They were going to get on the bus and they were going to shoot and kill children. And this is how CNN saw it. I've even seen things where you'll see pictures of kids standing around, with their thing on their head. Unarmed Palestinians. They're throwing rocks. They have slingshots. You remember David? He took down a pretty big guy with one shot out of a slingshot. It's unbelievable. And here's how one occupied Jerusalem. This is, I think, from the Lebanon Star. 90 Palestinians wounded in Gaza West Bank clashes. Occupied Jerusalem. Here's a little interview with Andrea Mitchell, who at the time was the First Lady of the Federal Reserve. Her husband, Alan Greenspan, was head of it, interviewing Ambassador Ron Dermer of the United States.
What about the possibility of excessive force?
Interviewing Ron Dermer, Israel's ambassador to the United States.
What about the possibility of excessive force?
Andrea, if someone was coming at you with a knife, would you want the police officer to take out a knife and to try to stop him, or would you want that police officer to shoot that person before he would attack you?
Not shoot to kill him. You're losing the war on social media because these videos, sometimes taken out of context, I'll grant you, are going viral throughout the world. You are potentially inciting more violence because of these incidents and the way they're being perceived.
Well, we are losing the war of lies. We are winning the war of truth because we have truth on our side. We are not trying to change the status quo on the Temple Mount. People who they say we are executing are not being executed. They're alive. They're not innocent people. All of a sudden, Israeli forces are looking for Palestinian children to gun down. This is the lies that are being spread through this media. It is very important for us to speak the truth. I have no doubt that if the war is about truth, that Israel will win.
John Kerry said the other day up at Harvard that the excessive growth of settlements in the last 2 years has led to frustration. He seemed to be implying that that was one of the triggers.
The issue of the settlements is an issue that has to be resolved in final status negotiations, but it has never been the source of the conflict. But here's a more important point. There are a lot of conflicts, Andrea, around the world. Hundreds of conflicts. Not all of them lead to terrorism. There's a lot of frustrations of a lot of people in a lot of places around the world. It doesn't lead to terrorism.
Well, at the World Zionist Congress, I should be done here in about 4 or 5 minutes, Prime Minister Netanyahu got up and he had this to say.
How many Muslims have visited and prayed on the Temple Mount, on average, last year? Anybody know? 300,000. No, not 300,000, 3.5 million. 80,000 Christians and other denominations, and 12,000 Jews. That hasn't changed. Though the Temple Mount is our holiest site, it was built there by King Solomon 3,000 years ago, 1,500 years before the birth of Islam. The second is not only that we seek to change the prayer arrangements on the Temple Mount and the non-prayer arrangements on the Temple Mount, which we don't, is that we seek to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now this is particularly farcical. It would be farcical if it weren't tragic. My grandfather came to this land in 1920, and he landed in Jaffa, and very shortly after he landed, he went to the immigration office in Jaffa, and a few months later it was burnt down by marauders. These attackers, Arab attackers, murdered several Jews, including our celebrated writer Brenner. And this attack and other attacks on the Jewish community in 1920 and 1921, 1929, were instigated by a call of the Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin al-Husseini, who was later sought for war crimes in the Nuremberg trials because he had a central role in fomenting the final solution. He flew to Berlin. Hitler didn't want to exterminate the Jews at the time. He wanted to expel the Jews. And Haj Amin al-Husseini went to Hitler and said, if you expel them, they'll all come here. So what should I do with them? He asked. He said, burn them. And he was sought during the Nuremberg trials for prosecution. He escaped it. Later died in cancer after the war, died of cancer in Cairo. But this is what Haj Amin al-Husseini said. He said, the Jews seek to destroy the Temple Mount. My grandfather in 1920 seeks to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So this lie is about 100 years old. It fomented many, many attacks. The Temple Mount stands. The Al-Aqsa Mosque stands. But the lie stands too, persists.
And he's right. Now, there's been a lot of Netanyahu misstated history. He doesn't know what he's talking about. You need to know his father was probably the preeminent Jewish historian of the last century. Passed away a few years ago at the age, I think he was 102 when he passed away. Melanie Phillips, writing a Jewish Chronicle in England, said the history lesson is needed, and we really need to look at this. She said in her article, if Prime Minister Cameron wants to stop radicalization at home, he should start educating Britain's Muslim community in Jewish history, that the Jews are a people, not a religious affiliation, that they are the only people for whom Israel has ever been their national kingdom centuries before Muhammad was born, and that their right to restore their own homeland was enshrined as international law as long ago as 1920. That would start puncturing the Muslim-Jew hatred which lies behind so much Islamic aggression. It might also open the clenched eyes of some British liberals and not a few British Jews. Caroline Glick, in her article Friday, wrote an article about what Prime Minister Netanyahu said at the World Zionist Congress. And she said, well, I won't go into all the details of it. She said, maybe he didn't quite state it accurately about Hussein, but Netanyahu is crazy like a fox. Because what happened? Well, he said that, and so what happened on all the news? They got out and they told exactly the story about Haj Amin al-Husseini's relationship with the Nazis and threw up the pictures and videos of him and talked about his meeting and everything. So guess what? A lot of people now are educated about history that weren't before because, so Caroline thinks that Netanyahu intentionally overstated the case a little bit so that everybody would talk about it even more. I happen to think that that's maybe exactly what happened. So, but look, what do we see here? We see the Jews isolated. We see people that are totally deceived because of this false religion of leftism, whatever you want to call it, that they follow. And they'll focus on climate change and social justice, and they'll ignore the real injustices, the real problems, the real evil that are happening right in front of their face. Because, as we've said over and over again, the predominant characteristic of the end times is deception. That deception is in play and playing out in our world right in front of our eyes. It operates in religion. You saw that at the Parliament of World Religions. It operates in church. You saw people there at that parliament who claim to be evangelicals, who really barely mentioned, I don't think Jesus came up that often, except as a prop or a crutch. You see it in geopolitics. You see a politician in our country caught in a complete, total lie. And 75% of the people think she was treated unfairly. I only bring this stuff up week after week after week because I want you to be aware of what's going on, because I know from talking to Christians and reading my email, Christians who are and should be rooted in the truth, not just the Word of God, but the truth in anything, write me and say, what's going on? Is everybody losing their minds? And I really think that they are. Now, we could go on for a long time. I'll close with this. Look, I really think that what's happening is that God is calling out his remnant. They're identifying themselves in small fellowships all over the world. They're finding each other on the internet, through YouTube postings and that type of thing right now. And God, I think, is decoupling us from the madness in the world so that we can better serve him. And that's a great thing. He's going to bring us to the end of ourselves in the church. Eventually, it's going to happen to the Jewish people when they will have no choice but to become totally dependent and reliant on God. And that's what you should take away from this today. We're not people who are rooted in the earth. We have a different perspective, and we need to live like that. So let's pray. Father, thanks again for your grace and your mercy and informing us through your word the characteristics of things that we should be aware of in the times that we live in so that we can make sense of what's going on. But Father, I pray that you will help all of us to be drawn closer to you, your Son, Jesus Christ, and guided by the Holy Spirit in everything that we say and do and live in these times. Bless us as we go this week. In Jesus' name, amen.